Welcome to Wellness Radio with Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher as your host. Her show discusses topics of health, wellness, and spirituality, and is about discovering your place in this great universe, from your cells to the cosmos. Along with her guest, in casual conversation, she strives to ask the difficult questions that may be holding you back from a vibrant life, and shares new ideas that may inspire you to make a change in your life that you only can see in your dreams. And now, here is Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Radio. This is Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening. Tonight, we are going to be talking about how are we existing in the world, how are we engaging with others, the nature community, the spiritual community, and even ourselves as energy beings. Are we sometimes stuck in the idea that this human vessel that we have carried around, as we have to have a perception in this human world, our soul and our spirit has the human vessel that brings us here to have an experience called a lifetime. And we as humans get scared. We think, how long is this going to last? I'm going to do everything I possibly can to make sure it lasts as long as all of the things that I want to do. Others say, oh my goodness, I fell into a hole. I'm very sick. My life is going to be shortened, and I'm going to miss so much. Still others say, it's kind of not the life I planned, but here I go. Sometimes we get stuck in the word of defining our lifetime, how it plays out, the length, perhaps the visions and perspectives, and also the experiences we have. We kind of say, was it a life well lived? Was it a life too short? Perhaps it's a life and I did my best. Many times when we speak about end of life, transitioning to the other world, becoming our soul energy beings again, we get kind of frightful. We say, oh, that's not where I want to go. And we do everything in the world to possibly avoid that moment in time. We rush to get all kinds of therapies and treatments. We say, there's no way I'm not going to have that happen to me. We sit in denial, and we put up our fear walls. Maybe we're missing something in the glory of how nature has its cycles. Can we watch a tree, how it cycles through the seasons? Perhaps an animal, how they cycle through their lifetimes, as they sometimes are much shorter. Perhaps maybe food or something we have on our table has a very short life cycle also. Perhaps can we see that these are all showing us something, that our energy being is eternal, and we can connect with everything around us if we just took a moment to stop and see something outside of everything that we are stuck in this definition of this human story. Today my guest is Daryl McCullough. His book is The Story of Tree and Cloud. It is a book for all ages. It is definitely something you can read to younger children, but it definitely is something you can read with your elders. You can read with those who have definitely a challenge of their memory issues. You can read with someone who is ill, perhaps someone who is out caregiving, maybe someone who just says, I want to connect with something more than where I am today. Today we're going to be talking about what is the connection with life in this world and beyond, and how can we find energy and say, you know what, this story is just never ending. Daryl, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
The pleasure is mine, Dr. Jeanette. Thank you for having me.
So glad to have you here to talk about this, because so many times people will say, we look at the past few years and they'll say, there's got to be something more to life. What is this all about? I think right now in the year, as we end 2022, we're saying, what is life about? What would I like to see going forward? And create real value for our connections, don't you think?
I couldn't agree more. The last couple of years through the pandemic and coming out of it has really just asked all of us the question of, what relationships in our world are truly meaningful anymore. And I think it's caused a lot of reflection and given us time to think among ourselves and with our loved ones about what's really important. And the process of life and moving on happens to everybody, and it certainly happened a lot during the pandemic. And I think it caused a good number of us to reflect.
If you look over the decades, you and I are of older age, and we look at our lifetimes. We grew up in the 50s and 60s. People's lives by the age of 60, they were pretty much, that was the regular age for people to pass on. People didn't live that long. Then we came along into the 90s, and people were looking for all kinds of anti-aging, and I want to live longer and longer. And now in the decade we're in, people are living until very much longer than they probably thought they ever would have lived. And we say, what is that about? Is that something that our life has changed and shifted? We're finding more value in it, and we're taking care of ourselves more?
I do think that. I also just think that the will to live is very strong. I lost my father in February. He died on Valentine's Day, interestingly, just a few days before what would have been my parents' 67th anniversary. And, he went to join Mom in heaven in my mind, and couldn't be any more romantic that happened on Valentine's Day of all times. But up until the end, he was extraordinarily active, very, very active in farming and gardening. And at 92, he would go out and plant flowers and pull weeds for hours on end. My brother has a farm, and he would pick potatoes for 4 or 5 hours in the hot sun. And at 92, it just showed that he had a real connection with both nature, but also a very strong drive to continue to enjoy life. And this is after 6 years of having lost the love of his life. So that will, despite his loneliness, still drove him to the very end. And he died unexpectedly, but I think he died a very happy man because he was very active up until the very end.
Don't you think that perhaps, just as your book, The Story of Tree and Cloud, what you just shared, I just had this vision that your father, after he had lost his wife, had a certain, what we call hole in our heart, or we feel as if something is lost. There's this like space that you need to fill. But in essence, he perhaps went on to explore the energy of her soul and spirit by finding it in nature. So he was actually nourishing and possibly conversing with your mother through nature, do you think? Because he was going around with the flowers, and sort of like, if you can find a flower or a female energy in a flower, you connect with them every moment that you can, right?
Yeah, they were truly soulmates, and they grew up in the Depression era. They lived through hard times. They built their own home. They raised 5 children in that home, and he died in that home. And and as well as my mother. So there is this spiritual connection that they had that transcends just the day to day. And I think his connection with nature was his church. We would also often go as a family to church on Sundays. And sometimes he would choose to stay home, and he would work in the garden, and he would tell us that was his commune with God by working in the field. And we saw that, and we knew that it was true, and we knew that there was no better of a man, even though he might not have gone to church that day.
Yeah, it's almost as if he had been speaking to her all along, And I think when you share in your book about the tree, when the tree finds Puddle and is able to converse with Puddle and have a conversation and kind of rely on an engaging connection with the Puddle. But in essence, isn't the Puddle just a reflection of your higher self that you're talking with?
I do think that metaphor works at that level very nicely. I did a reading for children, and a child asked a very profound question. Wouldn't there have been other puddles in Tree's life? And why this one? And I do think that Foley, the tree, at her 200 plus years of age, was ready to find that reflection and was ready to think about the greater questions of life and death and where energy goes after death. So I found that beautiful wisdom in that child's question, and it's really stuck with me ever since. So yeah, I mean, it's the fact of the matter is that water does evaporate and become air and forms clouds, and there is the very kind of scientific and natural notion of that, but then there's the more kind of spiritual notion of molecules and dissipation and that going into the atmosphere and surrounding us, and all of that is part of our ecosystem.
Right, because if you look at it, it's really about transformation. We as humans believe we always come back as humans. Well, maybe we come back as a cloud. Maybe we come back as a pet. Maybe we come back as a tree, So the idea is that energy can be transformed, and the idea is that we can find those deeper connections if we are willing to stop for a moment and say there is something more than this human vehicle. I think we get so stuck in the human vehicle. A lot of times people pray and they say, I'm really looking for an answer. And they set out their answer as like this thing that they write down on a piece of paper. And if it doesn't show up as exactly how they've written it, they feel like their prayers aren't answered. When in essence, truly, even just as the tree showed us with puddle and with cloud, it's whatever you connect to that shows up, versus asking and demanding a perfection answer. Do you think...
And I even push back on the notion of coming back as, what if it never leaves?
Correct.
That spirit may never leave. It just dissipates into some other kind of force. And if you are open to listening for it and looking for it, you will see signs. The fact that I found this book again, I don't know if you remember the story, but my mother was sick with cancer for many years, and she knew she would die one day. She had left this book that I had written in my junior high school. I had written a parable about death, and the class assignment was to write a parable or an extended metaphor, and I had just lost my close nephew, my close cousin, to suicide, and I was just grappling. I was a young teenager. I was grappling with the notion of suicide and how that could ever happen, and what happened to his spirit, and so I chose to write my assignment to help myself cope with that, and that story just sat in a closet or a drawer for 40 years, and my mother knew that I had written it. She saved it for me, and she left it on my desk. And after she died, I was up cleaning out my room and found this story. On top of it was a placard. It was a little sign that was painted with a deer and a tree, and the sign had the Bible verse, "Fear not, I'm always with thee." And it just clicked for me. I said, Mother left this message for me. She wanted me to know that she will always be with me, and I think she wants me to do something with this story. So it became my mission to rewrite this story. My aunt, who's a talented nature artist, did the gorgeous illustrations, and I'm so proud of her work. Really brought it to life beautifully. And we got the story published, and it's in the hands of many people. And just I get notes and calls and emails, and so many people that are touched. Either they've lost a loved one, or they're dealing with the potential of loss, or they're trying to teach their children about something. After the school shootings in Uvalde, Texas, I sent a few books down to the library in Uvalde, and the librarian called me and just said she was so touched by the donation. They had gotten 8,000 books donated, but she said this particular batch of books, she said she put in the hands of people that were really grieving, and it really touched me. It made me feel, if that's all the book, if that's the only good that the book does, I have done my work and I've honored my mother.
I think over the decades, if we look back at it, at when you and I grew up, death was very harsh. Don't forget, our parents were coming off post-war. They knew that death was harsh. They knew it was unexpected, and they knew it was difficult, and people lived in poverty, and things were very hard then. But in essence, if we look at it now with young children growing up, they don't know of all that history and all that hardship and all those stories, and they're not coming in as souls that have carried all of that burden of the old eons. They're coming in as new souls, and when they come in as new souls, they too can teach us in our elder years about how things transition, but also too, we can just sit with them and see the transition of their life, that things we don't have to carry around with us. So don't you think, in essence, when you wrote that story so long ago, it was there for a purpose? In other words, you were there to heal yourself. You were also just to leave it as a depository. It would help your mother through her transition, and she would leave it there again for you to use going forward. So all of the things in our world are markers if we just let them play out, right?
And a gorgeous cycle. You just painted a really beautiful cycle there, and now the book lives in print and will hopefully be paid forward in many, many more cycles.
Yes, and I think it's so very important. There's so many elders now who are alone, and there's so much dementia and Alzheimer's. There's a lot of chronic illness. And, you look at it and you say, well, they have their family. The answer is no, they don't have their family. A lot of elders are pretty much alone because they're living longer. Their families are very busy at middle of life, and they're just kind of drifting into the sunset. But in essence, I think sometimes if we can ease their fears, if we can ease their sense of saying, you know what, it's awesome. I can go tomorrow and I'm going to be good. I got this. Boy, I'll tell you, a lot of times people, they will drift off the next day and pass on. And it was right. They just needed to have a little door handle that said, there's more to you than today. And once they had that, they were so free. They were happy. Some, the rest of the quality of their life just improved, and they just felt better. And when they were ready to go, they left. And I think that's the gift we really want to give people, don't you think?
Mm-hmm. And I can't help but think that the notion of becoming a cloud, a puddle becoming a cloud, what a more beautiful thing to be in your afterlife. Heaven is obviously a gorgeous construct, but the fact that heaven is often depicted in art and literature as in the clouds is just such a gorgeous and soft and luscious place. And I whether you're religious, spiritual, or look at nature, I think you can find something to hold on to that gives you that kind of that peace and sense of hope, and the sense that this soul that has been living for however many years doesn't just stop one day. It's like that that energy continues. That energy continues and is around us, and it's up to us, the living, to seek it out and to embrace it.
What about the concept of when you have a conversation with nature, you go out, you hug a tree, you look at a cloud, you find a reflection in a puddle, perhaps you find it in an animal, or maybe just in a flower. And here's the most important thing, I think, is that nature does not judge. It doesn't know where you've been. It doesn't know what you didn't do. It doesn't have a human conversation in the form of the context, oh goodness, they know my story and I have to go hide. They really truly come in with pure white light energy, don't you think?
Yes, and nature has its purpose. It is, we talk a lot about living a purpose-filled life. Nature is the primary example of a purpose-filled life. Everything on the planet has a reason, and it has a job. And the tree, as I paint subtly in the book, the trees clean the air. That is their purpose. They breathe in the toxic carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen. Without them, we wouldn't be able to live on this planet. The bees and the butterflies pollinate the crops and help life continue to propagate. And it's just the truly magical force of nature, and all those various plants and animals doing their jobs that keep us all living is really the true magic of the world. And it's a shame that it's being tampered with and not being cared for with stewardship, but hopefully we'll see our wisdom or see the lack of wisdom and change our ways. It's scary. So I did want this book set in nature to be a bit of a cautionary tale about the fact that this is what sustainability is about. We are in an ecosystem that thrives and can't be tampered with.
Yeah. I think also, too, the idea is that, let's say when the puddle reflects to the tree, the puddle is not seeing all the cracks in the tree or the holes where all of the birds have eaten it out, or maybe it's disease or the caterpillars were, or maybe how it only has one leaf anymore that comes up on that great, grand branch. It just is. And I think sometimes if we can shed all of that, especially in chronic illness, disease, and death, if we can shed all of this stuff, how we see ourselves, how we feel ourselves, and all of those, all of those words and those feelings and those senses, if we could just let go of that, we can have these conversations that are deep-seated soul energy and spiritual, and be able to say, oh, but it's just going to be okay. I just love you unconditionally, or I can connect her to you and, you will feel me always. Just as your mother shared the little plaque with the deer, here's my question. Is a deer now your spirit animal?
It always has been. I think she knew that, and it was important for her to share that. Right.
Yeah, I think sometimes we tend to say, I want to just show up a certain way and I don't know how, or I'm afraid and I go hide. And I think what we want to really truly emphasize too is that a tree will always find its way. I live in New Orleans and, so many hurricanes have come by and totally taken out all of the trees, in certain areas, or stripped off all of their leaves. I even have a bamboo plant on my counter, and, all of the leaves have gone off, but out of the water came this little tiny sprout, and I'm going, where did you come from? Or you look at the trees, and all of a sudden, the big stalks that have been stripped stay in the middle, but all these smaller trees start to grow up around them. And so the idea is that everything transforms, everything has a cycle of life, but to honor it in the moment it is. How can we also, too, Daryl, in closing, talk about honoring who we are, where we've been in life, where we're going, but to honor the journey?
Well, that's where I think storytelling comes. We can honor our ancestors, we can honor our loved ones by keeping their stories alive and sharing those important moments with others. And that's how we teach our children. That's how they'll teach their children. And, that is what really breathes life into humanity, I think. It's the beautiful thing about literature. It's the beautiful thing about storytelling, the beautiful thing about radio programs, that your words can touch another life. And we honor those in our past and in our present by sharing stories that are personal and heartfelt and are hopeful. And that's what I tried to do with my book.
Right. And what I also found about your book is that there's a lot of blank space, white space, as I call it. And I think that's so vitally important in books. When you're reading a book to a child, I always say, put your name and date it. And when you do that, you've now made a mark, and this becomes a journal or a legacy book for the child. And always write down what the child may have said, or you can always later share a story that you told them and write it directly in the book. People are saying, oh, don't write in the books. And I'm like, no, I want you to write in the books. I want these to be legacy stories, you know. Let's say a child comes into the nursing home and they bring a book with them, such as yours, and they read it to someone. The child can write their name and date it, and then they could write something down or a story. When the person passes on, that's a legacy book. You know, those are so vitally, this is so vitally important, don't you think?
That's such a beautiful notion. Have you ever toured the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam?
No.
It is the Anne Frank house, obviously, you know, the book of the Holocaust, and you know, it's her home where she hid and hid out from the Gestapo, and the tour is simply a walking tour through the floors of her home, and it has, you know, obviously a narration along the way, but at the end you spill out into the kind of what would normally be the gift shop, I guess, on the way out the door, but there is a book. It's a library of journals, and everyone that has toured the museum before has written in the journal. So it's like a guest book, but you can write 2 words or you can write 2 pages, and you can read other people's expressions of what they felt after making the tour, and it is just one of the most powerful and moving moments I've ever had in a museum, and it's all about those personal expressions and reactions to their experience, and it's extraordinarily touching and moving, and it's all about that paying forward, that expression of feeling.
Right, because really what you're doing is you're engaging the energy connection, that's number one, what your book is all about. You're engaging with the energy of beings. And when you do that, that's truly all we're about. All of this other stuff is just, you know, fancy on the cake, kind of speak. Yeah. You know, it's only words. You know, the words, you throw up the alphabet, and you'd be astonished how many words can come out of just those letters. But the idea is that when it comes to energy, that's really where life is golden, because that is life. It's the vital force. It's the breath. You know, we talk about Tao and Tao all the time on here. We talk about Buddha. We talk about spiritual entities. We talk about ghosts and angels. And all of that, when it comes right down to it, all of those words can go away, and all we're really sourcing is the energy within that is the I am, correct?
Makes me want to go for a walk in nature, Jeanette.
Yeah. Well, what that really does, I think, also too, Daryl, is that brings you, when you go into connection, you walk in nature, you connect with your mother or you connect with your father just by breath or just by feeling. You're not looking for something that's going to stand out and say, hey, I'm your father, I'm over here waving to you. You'll just have that feeling. Isn't the feeling what we're trying to incorporate in people's minds?
Absolutely, and the memory. I think memory is also a really wonderful association. I remember, you know, it's autumn now, and I remember mother and dad always driving to look at the leaves change colors, and you know, it was just such a important time of the year. Or driving into the mountains for the apple orchard, picking and fresh apple cider, and you know, there's so many kind of sensory kind of experiences that are attached to nature that also attach to our memories, and they're some of the most poignant memories. So I think it's important to reflect. I mean, Thoreau told us that, you know, walking into nature is a transcendental experience.
Right. And also, too, I wanted to share this with our listeners and with Daryl, is also, too, at the end of life, there's a lot of times people will say they've lived a very hard life. They are carrying a very heavy burden, a lot of shame, guilt, and pain and struggles, and they just want to, they're going to take it with them because they don't want to let anyone release it. And just as I am sharing that, I'm having a glimpse of a puddle underneath a tree, and the tree says, can you take on my burdens? I need to go, and it's time to release. And all of the leaves are starting to fall into the puddle, and the puddle says, I'll happily take them. And then in the puddle, what does the puddle do with the leaves? It transforms them, you know? And if you just see that, It doesn't say no and go running away. It doesn't say, oh, no, I can't. And it doesn't shudder away. It just is. So I think the idea is, how can we also understand, as we work with many with grief, chronic illness and death, or those who are feeling they have so much guilt and shame inside, is the idea is that their nature will allow you to release that when you're ready. And when you're ready to do that, you can just find a puddle and let your tears fall down. You can just find a tree and sit underneath and let the leaves just come around you. You can turn around and go out into a lake and let the water support you. These are all ways in which we can use metaphors to be able to help us in our heart and our soul to be healed, just as your book does, yes?
Yes, and nature has all the lessons of renewal. I mean, I live in California where we are often plagued with wildfires, and it's one of those kind of fascinating things where the wildfires, as destructive as they seem on the surface, are necessary for renewal in the forest. And it's a hard concept to understand. It's often like death. It's sometimes things need to die to be reborn and to cleanse and to repurify. And I think again the lessons are there. These are not new to anybody, but we have to be open to finding them and listening to them.
I think eventually I will hope that we start to use not the word die or any of its whatever we connect it with, and start using the word shedding. We're shedding the human vehicle that we've carried this time, and we're on to the next one. And then we will be able to say, yes, that spirit energy is all around. It is eternal. Wouldn't that be awesome?
It's happening every day, everywhere around us. We just have to be open to seeing it.
Yeah, it makes it so much easier. It doesn't put extra burden on the people who aren't ready to transition yet, or walk through that door, or be in the next spirit of space and time. And it doesn't put heavy burdens. Backlash. So many times at end of life, people will say, "Oh, there's something I got to tell you," and they dump all their stuff on the people that have been left behind, and we go, oh, please don't do that. We're going to give you a venue. You'll be able to shed that here, right now, and then we just honor everybody around us, because we want to start a healing evolution going forward versus saying we want to keep spewing on the lifetimes, right? It's such a different kind of life, I think, Daryl. I think it's absolutely wonderful that you have that story that you wrote, when you were younger. And it's, in closing, I wanted to share this. There was a story that I had written also when I was in 5th grade. And we had so much abuse and violence in my home and within my family unit and all the relatives. And I had written a story about a peach that wasn't ripe yet, and it was inside of a brown paper bag. And all of the attempts to keep trying to get at it and poke at it, and yet it kept itself protected until it was its time to shine. And I don't remember the rest of the story, but I do distinctly remember that. And I've always felt like that peach had value. It just wasn't its time, and it needed to keep itself protected. I think a lot of times people will say with our children, just keep them protected and well, keep them protected and happy, and their time they will shine. And we don't want to always be banging on the bag sometimes, so to speak. A lot of times people will say, but I've had violence, but it's okay. You can let it go. Do the same metaphor with, a peach in a bag on the counter and say, I too can shine, just as your book. I too am eternal. Oh goodness, I can heal. I can feel myself. I can see in a cloud my ancestors. I can see my reflection in the puddle. These are all new ways that we're starting to engage in the world. And Daryl, what you and I have shared today is how to switch up our vocabulary, ease up our life, and be able to say, this is awesome where we are, and share it with others. That's an inspirational path that we truly hope others will start to pick up, yes?
Yeah, it's a beautiful way to live in gratitude. And, I think, again, there's just so many lessons in nature, and if we are only open to looking around us and learning more about them and learning what we can from them and how it can help us kind of provide insights into our existence.
Right. Yeah, so it's so awesome when we be able to, and you get to that point, because you don't have this strain on your back, these other stories, and it's sort of you go, I just feel lighter. And I think it's reflecting in our lives. We're cleaning out our houses and our drawers. We're not keeping all of this stuff anymore, and we're kind of just enjoying life a little bit more. And isn't that what we want? Absolutely. Well, Daryl, it was a pleasure to have you with us here today to share how
Pleasure's been mine.
It's been great because we can teach ourselves how to share the stories with our elders and our young children. And we hope that your book, The Story of Tree and Cloud, people will say, I'm going to go read this to my elders, my family member who might be in a nursing home or is not feeling well. Or maybe we'll bring a child to read the story, and we will document it on the pages. Still others, elders will sit down and read it to a child, and again, too, do the same thing. And share our experiences. That's what we want to do, right?
Absolutely. And just remember that the message of the book is that loved ones never truly leave us. They're always around us. We just have to look for signs.
Absolutely. And signs can be anything. They can be your favorite food. They can be a song on the radio in the grocery store. Did you ever have that one happen?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Or, or all of a sudden you'll just see a beautiful color or maybe just a ray of light, and that's what we want, right?
Absolutely.
Well, Daryl, can you share with the listeners how to find out more information about your work? That would be wonderful.
There's a website for the book, www.thestoryoftree-and-cloud.com, and there's a little bit more information about the book. We've also just recently uploaded a PDF coloring book. Your point about students seeing creativity in white space. A number of people are loving our coloring book, which is allowing them to color in their own beautiful pictures of nature. The book is available, obviously, for sale at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Target.com, or on the book website, www.thestoryoftree-and-cloud.com. You can also follow and see pictures of my nature walks and cloud pictures, and some sent in from readers on Instagram at The Story of Tree and Cloud on Instagram. And people are enjoying keeping those stories alive there, and I hope that people will find the book and find it helpful.
Very awesome. Well, it was such a pleasure to have you with us, Daryl. It was just a great idea to be able to share our stories and see how things evolve. And I really encourage everyone, please connect with your elders with these books, because it's so vitally important to touch them at that time in their life. So I thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine, Jeanette.
If you'd like to find out more information about Daryl McCullough, again, the book is The Story of Tree and Cloud. Please do click on the link on the bottom of today's show page to go directly to his website for more information. And it definitely is about being able to say we are so much more than the story we've been told in the past, the lives we have lived, the experiences we've had, and maybe the collection of all the pain and suffering we've had. It is now time to see that we are truly soul and spiritual beings and connect with everyone and everything around us with nature and with joy, gratitude, love, and honor. We all can do it if we're just able and willing to be able to say we can let go of those old things and just say, I'm going to be okay. This world, it has its own time, its own cycle, its own life, and we truly will all still be connected. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Dr. Jeanette-Gallagher, and until tomorrow, have a great day.
Today we discussed many life-changing concepts. Who do you turn to, and how do you know what is best when faced with a health crisis? Dr. Jeanette is a patient advocate. She listens to the patient, the doctors, and the family, clarifies the health issues and concerns, then helps the patient make the best choices going forward. If you would like help implementing change into your life and health, we can talk and see where you are stuck and how to improve the quality of your life. Check the link on the bottom of today's show page or visit dr.jeanette-gallagher.com to schedule a phone appointment today.